She woke up early as usual, the soft gray light of the morning slipping through her small apartment window. The room was quiet, almost empty, but the walls were lined with stacks of sheet music, notebooks filled with musical ideas, and a small keyboard tucked into the corner. She had kept it simple because she did not have much money, but she had filled the space with her love for music. The piano had been her companion for years, a place where she could escape the worries of the world and let her feelings flow. Her routine was familiar and comforting. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the city come to life. People hurried by, some with coffee in hand, others talking on their phones. She felt a small pang of longing as she watched them. Her life was ordinary, filled with work and small tasks, and yet in those quiet moments, she imagined something more. She imagined standing on a stage, playing music that could move people, music that could make them stop and listen. But those were only dreams, tucked away in her mind, because she worked as a server at a local event hall, not as a musician. By the time she got to work, the hall was already buzzing with activity. Tables were being set, flowers arranged, and staff members scurried about, making sure everything was perfect. She slipped into her uniform, a simple blouse and apron, and took a deep breath. Today was important. A big party was happening, one that she had heard about for weeks. It was a celebration for someone important, and many influential guests would be there. She had been told she might be asked to play a tune on the piano, just something light, background music. Her heart jumped at the thought, but she tried not to let it show. She was only a server, and she did not want to draw attention. The hours passed quickly. She moved from table to table, carrying trays of drinks, making sure glasses were full, and offering polite smiles to the guests. Some looked at her with casual curiosity, others barely noticed her. She had learned to fade into the background, to do her job quietly and efficiently. But her mind was elsewhere, thinking about the piano, imagining the moment when she might sit down and play. Every time she passed by the grand piano in the corner of the room, her heart skipped a beat. It was shiny and elegant, almost glowing in the soft light of the hall, and she could almost hear it calling to her. Finally, the host approached her, a tall woman with a friendly smile. "Would you mind playing a simple tune for the guests? Just something light and pleasant," she said. The words seemed to hang in the air, both an opportunity and a test. She nodded, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had played for friends before, for small gatherings, but never for a crowd like this, never for people who expected something ordinary and polite. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and walked to the piano. The first few notes were tentative. She played the simple tune as requested, soft and unobtrusive. The guests were chatting, clinking glasses, and she felt almost invisible. But as her fingers moved over the keys, something inside her stirred. The melody felt too small, too ordinary for what she wanted to express. She could feel the music building inside her, growing more complex, more alive. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the rhythm of her own heartbeat, and then she began to add a little variation. A subtle turn here, a gentle rise there. The simple tune began to transform. At first, the changes were small, almost unnoticeable. Some guests continued their conversations, unaware of the shift. But slowly, more people began to notice, turning their heads, listening. There was something different in the sound, something unexpected and beautiful. Her hands moved with a confidence she had never allowed herself to show in public. She felt a thrill, a rush of energy, as if the piano itself had given her permission to play freely, without fear or restraint. She remembered all the evenings she had spent alone, practicing in the tiny apartment, dreaming of this very moment. The hours of frustration, the nights when her fingers ached, the times she thought she would never be good enough. All of it led to this. And now, as the music flowed from her, she realized that she was no longer just a server, no longer just a quiet observer in the background. She was a musician, and the piano was her voice. A few guests had stopped talking completely. One man, dressed in a sharp suit, leaned against a pillar, eyes wide, listening intently. A woman near the corner held her glass, motionless, her expression caught between surprise and admiration. She had never seen anything like this at such parties. Never expected a server to play anything beyond the polite tunes meant for background noise. But there was no mistaking the skill and emotion in the music. Each note seemed to tell a story. Each chord carried a feeling that words could not capture. She continued, letting the music guide her. The simple tune had become a canvas, and she painted on it with every experience she had, every quiet hope, every long night of practice. She did not think about the audience, did not think about the applause or approval. She played because she had to, because the music was part of her. And slowly, the room began to change. Conversations stopped, glasses were set down, and people leaned closer, drawn in by the sound. Her heart raced, but in a good way. She felt alive, completely present in the moment. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge between her inner world and the people around her. She could see the expressions on their faces, the subtle smiles, the raised eyebrows, the quiet awe. They were listening, really listening, and she could feel the connection. It was a strange and wonderful sensation, to be seen and heard in a way she had never experienced before. The host, who had first asked her to play, watched from a distance, a smile spreading across her face. She had not expected anything like this. The music filled the hall, wrapping around the guests, pulling them into its flow. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Others whispered to each other, amazed at the talent before them. She felt a deep sense of joy, not just from the applause or attention, but from knowing that she had finally shared a part of herself that had always been hidden. When the last note faded, there was a pause, a quiet moment of reverence. And then the room erupted in applause. Hands clapped, feet stamped lightly, and voices cheered. She opened her eyes, slightly trembling, and saw the faces of the guests beaming at her. They had been expecting something ordinary, something safe, and instead, they had witnessed something extraordinary. She felt a rush of gratitude, a mixture of relief and exhilaration. She had done it. She had taken a simple request and turned it into a moment that no one would forget. After the applause, people approached her, offering congratulations, compliments, and words of amazement. She felt shy at first, unsure how to respond, but she smiled, nodding politely, letting their appreciation sink in. It was overwhelming, but also deeply rewarding. For the first time, she felt that her music had value beyond her own apartment, beyond her own dreams. It had touched others, moved them, and that feeling was more powerful than anything she had imagined. She returned to her server duties after the performance, but everything felt different. The simple act of serving drinks and clearing tables was now colored with a sense of pride and confidence. She had faced her fear, shared her passion, and been recognized for it. The music lingered in the air, and in her mind, a new understanding took hold, that she could no longer be content to hide her talent, to keep it tucked away. The world was bigger than she had imagined, and there was a place in it for her music. By the end of the night, the guests had departed, leaving the hall quiet once more. She sat at the piano again, alone, and played a few notes, smiling to herself. The simple tune that had started it all was now just a memory, a starting point for something greater. She knew this was only the beginning, that there would be more moments, more opportunities, more music to share. And for the first time in a long time, she felt hope, excitement, and a quiet certainty that her life was changing, note by note, one melody at a time. She had barely returned to her duties when the host came over with a small smile and a polite nod. "Would you mind starting with a simple tune? Just something soft and pleasant for the guests," the host said. She nodded, a small flutter of nerves rising in her chest. She knew she could do it, but part of her wanted to run away, to remain invisible and safe behind the tables and trays she carried every day. She told herself to breathe, to remember the feeling she had when playing alone at home. Music was her comfort, her voice, and if she could find that feeling again, she could make this moment her own. The hall was alive with chatter and laughter as she walked toward the piano. People were dressed in elegant clothes, sparkling jewelry, and confident smiles. She felt out of place in her simple uniform, a quiet observer in a room filled with energy and wealth. Yet, when her hands touched the keys, everything else faded. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar texture of the keys under her fingertips. The simple tune she had been asked to play began, soft and careful, almost shy in its approach. At first, the guests barely noticed. Glasses clinked, forks scraped plates, and conversations continued around her. She felt invisible, just a server fulfilling a small request. But as she played, she remembered all the hours she had spent practicing in her apartment, late at night, when no one was watching. She remembered the music that had lived inside her for years, waiting to be heard. Slowly, she allowed herself to let it out, adding tiny variations to the tune. A small rise here, a gentle turn there, nothing flashy, but enough to change the rhythm and the feeling of the music. She noticed a few heads turn. A couple of guests glanced toward her with curiosity. One man, dressed in a dark suit, leaned slightly forward, resting his glass on the table as he listened. She felt a small spark of confidence. If just a few people were noticing, maybe she could let herself go a little more. Her fingers moved more freely now, no longer bound by the simple request. She added a soft chord, then a delicate trill, and the music began to flow in ways she had not expected. It was like the piano itself was encouraging her, guiding her fingers toward melodies she had only dreamed of. The change in the music was subtle at first, almost unnoticed. The guests were still chatting, still laughing, but the tone in the room began to shift. Conversations slowed, people paused mid-sentence, and their attention drifted toward the piano. She opened her eyes for a brief moment and saw that more than a few were listening, their expressions caught between curiosity and surprise. She felt a thrill she had never known before, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was no longer a simple tune. It was becoming something personal, something alive. She continued to play, letting the music grow naturally. Every note carried a piece of her experience. Every chord reflected the hours of practice and quiet dedication she had given to this instrument. Her body moved with the music, leaning slightly forward, pressing each key with intention and feeling. The room began to fall silent in pockets. Some guests had stopped talking entirely, drawn into the sound. Others turned from their plates or conversations to watch her, their curiosity now mixed with admiration. A group near the back, who had been skeptical at first, now whispered among themselves, eyes wide. "Is she a professional?" one asked quietly. Another shook their head in disbelief. The idea that a server, someone who had been walking around serving drinks moments ago, could create such music seemed impossible. She didn't notice the whispers, didn't think about their surprise. Her focus was entirely on the piano, on letting the music express what words could not. Time seemed to stretch as she played. She felt herself lifting out of the ordinary world, carried by the rhythm, the melody, and the emotion that poured from her fingers. The simple tune she had started with was almost unrecognizable now. It had become richer, fuller, and more intricate, carrying a sense of depth and beauty that took the audience by surprise. She opened her eyes again and saw the room differently. People were no longer just guests at a party. They were listeners, participants in the music she was creating. She could see the wonder in their faces, the shift from casual attention to genuine engagement. One older woman, sitting near the side, had her hand on her chest, eyes closed, moved by the sound. A young man near the front leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand, watching her fingers fly over the keys. Even the children present had stopped playing and were staring, captivated by the music. The atmosphere in the hall changed completely, transformed from a simple celebration to a shared experience of something extraordinary. The energy was electric, yet soft, intimate, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Her confidence grew with every note. The nerves that had gripped her earlier melted away, replaced by a sense of control and freedom. She realized she was no longer performing a request. She was telling a story through the piano. Each rise and fall of the melody reflected her inner world, the quiet struggles, the hopes, and the dreams that had been nurtured in secret. The music was no longer for the guests alone. It was for her as well, a way to claim her own space in a world that had often overlooked her. The murmurs in the audience grew quieter. Some guests who had been talking stopped completely, leaning closer to hear better. The host watched from across the room, expression shifting from polite expectation to amazement. She could see the surprise on her face, the realization that the server she had underestimated was now the center of attention for reasons she had not imagined. There was no need for words. The music itself was enough to communicate everything. She allowed herself a small smile as the notes danced across the room. The piano felt alive under her hands, responding to her emotions, encouraging her to push further, to explore melodies that had once only existed in her imagination. The hall, once full of polite chatter and background noise, had become a sanctuary of sound. People listened with rapt attention not because they were told to, but because the music demanded it. Her quiet confidence was growing, and she could feel the connection between herself and the audience, a bond created purely through the language of music. As the performance continued, she noticed subtle reactions all around her. The man in the dark suit had a slight smile, the older woman opened her eyes and nodded gently, and the young man at the front was clearly fascinated, leaning even closer. Even the staff paused for a moment, surprised at the transformation taking place. She realized that something unexpected was happening. The music had grown beyond a simple tune. It had become a living thing, a presence in the room that could not be ignored. Her hands moved faster, yet with precision, as she added layers of emotion and rhythm. She allowed herself to experiment, to push boundaries, all while keeping the core of the original tune intact. The guests, now fully aware of the depth and beauty of what they were hearing, were leaning in, some whispering to each other, some simply silent, absorbed. She felt the weight of the room's attention, yet it did not frighten her. Instead, it fueled her, giving her energy and courage she had never known she possessed. The music began to flow naturally into longer phrases, more elaborate chords, and subtle shifts in tempo. It told a story without words, capturing joy, anticipation, and even a touch of melancholy. She thought of her own life, of all the quiet nights spent practicing, of the hope and determination that had brought her to this moment. Each note carried a part of her, and she could sense the audience responding, feeling the emotion she was conveying. By the time she reached the middle of her performance, the entire room was silent. The guests who had been skeptical, who had expected something ordinary, were now fully engaged, their attention captured completely. The children, who had been fidgeting, sat still, eyes wide, as if they were witnessing magic. The older guests had stopped murmuring, nodding to themselves in appreciation. And the host, once polite and formal, now watched with quiet awe, realizing that she had underestimated the talent of the person she had called a server. She could feel her heart beating rapidly, not from nerves, but from exhilaration. The music was no longer just for the audience. It was for her, for the years of practice, for the quiet persistence, for the dreams that had seemed distant and impossible. Each note, each chord, was a declaration of her presence, a statement that she belonged here, that her talent could not be ignored. The simple tune had served as a starting point, but it had evolved into something far greater, something alive, something that could touch hearts. As the piece drew toward its conclusion, she added the final flourishes, soft and deliberate. The last note lingered in the air, resonating with the room. There was a pause, a moment of collective breath, before the sound of applause erupted. Hands clapped, feet stamped lightly, and voices cheered. She opened her eyes, slightly trembling, and saw the guests beaming at her. They had witnessed a transformation, a quiet server revealing a hidden depth of talent that no one had expected. When the applause subsided, people approached her, offering compliments and congratulations. She smiled, nodding politely, feeling a mixture of pride, relief, and humility. It was overwhelming yet deeply rewarding. She had taken a simple request to play a tune and turned it into an unforgettable moment. For the first time, She felt that her music had power beyond her own private world, that it could move people, touch hearts, and create a lasting impression. She returned to her duties after the performance, but everything felt different. The simple tasks of serving drinks and clearing tables were now seen through a new lens. She had discovered a part of herself that could not be hidden any longer. The piano had become a bridge between her inner life and the world around her, a voice that demanded to be heard. And she knew that this was only the beginning, that more moments would come, more opportunities to share her gift, and more people would listen. The experience had changed her quietly, deeply, and forever as she continued to play. The simple tune she had begun with transformed more and more. What had started as a polite background melody had grown into something rich and alive. Each note seemed to carry a story, a feeling, a depth that went far beyond what anyone had expected. Her fingers moved faster, yet with grace, dancing across the keys in a way that felt both natural and magical. She closed her eyes again, letting the music guide her, letting her soul speak through her hands. The audience, who had once been casual observers, were now completely absorbed. Conversations had stopped entirely. People leaned closer, some sitting on the edge of their seats, captivated by the unexpected brilliance of the performance. The man in the dark suit who had been watching from the back now stood quietly, his hands folded, eyes fixed on the piano. The older woman, who had been holding her chest earlier, now looked at her with admiration, a small tear glistening in her eye. Even the children were still, their mouths slightly open, completely enthralled. She felt a strange mixture of nervousness and exhilaration. Every time she played a note, she was aware of the power of her music, the way it reached across the room, touching people she had never met before. She had dreamed of this moment in small ways, in her apartment, imagining the joy of playing for others. But this was far beyond anything she had imagined. The energy of the audience, the silence, the focus on her, all combined to create a feeling that was almost overwhelming. Her mind drifted to the countless nights she had spent practicing alone. She remembered the long hours where her fingers ached, the times she had doubted herself, the frustration when melodies didn't come together as she wanted. All of it had prepared her for this moment. She realized that the music she had created was not just for the audience. It was a culmination of her life, her passion, and her dedication. She could feel the weight and the beauty of every experience being poured into each chord, each movement, each subtle rise and fall of the melody. As she played, she allowed herself to experiment more boldly. She added gentle flourishes here, a sudden rise there, pauses that felt like breaths in the music. Each addition enhanced the tune, transforming it into a full piano masterpiece. The rhythm swelled, soft notes became strong, intricate patterns emerged, and the music seemed to take a life of its own. She didn't think about what the audience would feel or say. She simply played, guided by the emotion inside her, trusting the music to carry her and the listeners. The room had become quiet in a way that felt almost sacred. Guests who had been skeptical now watched with wide eyes. The woman who had been holding her chest was now smiling, wiping away a tear. The children were completely still, their eyes following every movement of her hands. Even the host, who had initially asked for a simple tune, now stood silently, unable to hide the astonishment in her expression. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a vessel for emotion, for storytelling, for connection. She began to feel a flow, a rhythm that carried her beyond fear or hesitation. She remembered the feelings of being overlooked, of working quietly behind the scenes, of dreaming without being noticed. All of that poured into the music, giving it a strength and authenticity that could not be taught or copied. The audience responded not just to skill, but to the honesty, the heart, and the soul that came through each note. They were experiencing something real, something unexpected, something that moved them. As she progressed, she noticed small, human reactions around the room. The man in the dark suit leaned forward, eyes shining, clearly mesmerized. The older woman gently tapped her fingers on her knee in rhythm, a silent acknowledgement of the beauty she was witnessing. The host's smile widened, her hands clasped in front of her chest, as she watched the transformation of the tune unfold. Even those who had been chatting before now leaned closer, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. Every eye was on her, every ear tuned to the music, and she felt the full weight of their attention, yet it felt empowering rather than frightening. She allowed herself to feel joy in the moment, a rare and pure happiness that came from expressing something so deeply personal. The music became an extension of herself, a language that needed no translation, no explanation. She could feel the energy of the room flowing into her, feeding her creativity, pushing her to explore more daring chords, more intricate patterns, more dynamic expressions. It was as if the piano and the audience were partners in creating a shared experience, a dialogue without words. She played with deliberate passion, every note carefully chosen yet flowing naturally. The tune grew, layered with emotion, complexity, and grace. Each moment held tension and release, subtle whispers of sound followed by bold declarations of melody. She felt herself becoming lost in the music, fully present, completely alive. There was no fear now, only confidence and connection. She realized that her gift was not just about playing notes, but about sharing a part of herself, her story, her heart. The audience, captivated, responded in kind. The room seemed to hold its breath with each delicate passage, then swell with the louder, more powerful chords. She could sense their amazement, their silent wonder, their growing recognition that they were witnessing something extraordinary. She glanced briefly at the host, who nodded slightly, eyes wide, a look of disbelief and respect on her face. Even the staff, who had been quietly observing, now exchanged looks of admiration, clearly stunned by what was unfolding before them. She felt a surge of energy as she moved into the final section of her performance. The music had taken on a life of its own, growing beyond her expectations. Each note was imbued with intention, each chord carried emotion. She allowed herself to stretch the tune, to add unexpected turns and gentle improvisation, trusting the flow and the rhythm. The piano seemed to resonate with her own heartbeat, and she could feel the harmony spreading through the room, touching everyone present. As the music reached its peak, she played with controlled power, letting each key vibrate fully, filling the hall with sound. The audience was completely silent now, fully absorbed, almost as if time had stopped. She could feel their focus, their admiration, their surprise, and it gave her a sense of fulfillment she had never known. This was more than a performance. It was a communion, a moment of shared humanity through the language of music. Finally, as she played the closing chords, the sound softened, fading gently into the air. She held the last note, letting it resonate, before releasing her hands and sitting back slightly, breathless. There was a pause, a quiet moment where the room seemed to hold its collective breath, and then the applause began. It started slowly, a few claps here and there, and quickly grew into a wave of hands, cheers, and whistles. People were standing, some clapping enthusiastically, some smiling with amazement, others wiping tears from their eyes. She opened her eyes fully, overwhelmed by the reaction. The guests were looking at her with newfound respect, admiration, and wonder. They had come expecting a simple tune, polite and unremarkable, and had witnessed a transformation, a hidden talent that took their breath away. She felt a mixture of pride, humility, and disbelief. She had shared a piece of herself, and it had been received in a way that exceeded anything she had imagined. The host approached her again, her expression radiant. "That was incredible," she said softly, still a little in awe. "I didn't know you had such talent." She smiled, a warm and genuine smile, and reached out to shake her hand. The guests continued to approach, offering congratulations, questions, and compliments. She responded with a modest smile, feeling shy but grateful. The overwhelming recognition was new to her, and yet it felt right. It felt like the moment she had been waiting for her entire life. After a few minutes, she returned to her duties, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. The hall, once just a place of work, now seemed full of possibility. She moved through the space with a quiet confidence, knowing that she had proven something to herself and to others. The music lingered in the air, a reminder of the moment she had dared to step beyond expectations, to transform a simple request into a masterpiece. She knew that her life had changed, that this was only the beginning of a journey that would take her to new places, with new opportunities and experiences waiting. Sitting quietly later that evening, she reflected on what had happened. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and self-doubt, and she had chosen to trust her talent, to let her music speak. The result was more than applause or recognition. It was a connection, a shared experience that touched hearts and left an impression she would never forget. She understood now that her gift was not just for her own satisfaction, but for the world to hear, to feel, and to be moved by. The piano had given her a voice, and she had finally allowed it to sing. The room was completely silent now, as if every person present had stopped breathing to listen. The music she was creating filled the space, wrapping around the guests, touching their hearts in ways she could not have imagined. She had started with a simple tune, but now it had become a masterpiece, intricate and emotional, full of rises and falls, moments of quiet reflection, and bursts of energy that swept through the hall like a gentle storm. She could feel the power of the piano beneath her hands, and with each note, the audience felt the story she was telling without words. Her hands moved effortlessly over the keys, dancing, pressing, and lifting with precision and grace. Every chord seemed to carry a piece of her soul, every melody a memory, a dream, a feeling she had carried inside for years. She thought of the nights she had spent alone, practicing until her fingers ached, imagining an audience who would one day hear her music. And now, here they were, not imagined, but real, feeling and experiencing what she had only ever dreamed of sharing. She felt both nervous and exhilarated, as if the music itself was carrying her and the guests into another world. People around her were completely absorbed. The man in the dark suit who had been observing earlier now leaned forward, his face filled with amazement. The older woman, who had been quietly moved before, now had tears in her eyes, smiling softly, unable to look away. Children sat still, completely captivated, their small faces reflecting wonder and curiosity. Even the staff, who had once gone about their duties, were now standing quietly, drawn to the sound and the emotion it carried. The music had changed everything in the room, transforming it from a space of polite chatter into a place of awe and connection. She allowed herself to follow the music wherever it wanted to go. Improvisation took over, and the melody she had started with evolved naturally, gracefully, and powerfully. She added subtle shifts in rhythm, soft pauses that gave the audience a moment to breathe, and gentle rises that lifted the atmosphere, making it feel alive. She did not need to see their reactions to know they were moved. She could feel it in the room, in the way the air seemed to hum with attention, in the small sounds of breath held and exhaled, in the quiet intensity of their focus. The host, who had first asked her to play a simple tune, now watched in astonishment. She could see the change in the room, the way the audience had transformed from casual guests to fully engaged listeners. The performer's skill was undeniable, but it was more than that. It was the emotion, the heart, and the authenticity she brought that had captured their attention so completely. Even those who had been skeptical, who had laughed quietly at the thought of a server playing the piano, were now leaning forward, eyes wide, recognizing the depth of talent and feeling in every note. As she continued, she became more confident, more free. Her nervousness had melted away, replaced by the thrill of creating something larger than herself. Each movement, each chord, seemed to carry the weight of her dreams and experiences, and the audience responded in kind. Some guests closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, feeling the story without needing to understand it in words. Others nodded gently, tapping their fingers on their laps or swaying slightly to the rhythm, silently acknowledging the beauty of what they were witnessing. She thought about how far she had come from the quiet nights alone with her piano to this moment of shared experience. The music had become a bridge between her world and theirs, a connection that went beyond speech, beyond appearances, beyond expectation. She could feel the energy of the room flowing into her, urging her to continue, to explore deeper emotions, to let the music speak freely. She no longer thought about the simple tune she had been asked to play. That had been only the beginning. Now she was telling a story, one that only she could tell, through the language of the piano. Her hands moved with increasing precision, yet with a natural flow that seemed to emerge from her very being. The notes built upon each other, weaving a tapestry of sound that was rich, dynamic, and full of life. There were moments of delicate softness, where the music seemed to whisper, and moments of bold intensity, where it seemed to shout with joy, hope, and longing. The audience followed every movement, completely immersed in the experience, feeling the emotions she poured into each phrase. She noticed subtle gestures among the guests. The man who had been leaning forward now rested his hand on his chest, eyes shining with emotion. The older woman dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, moved by the depth and beauty of the performance. The children, wide-eyed and silent, seemed to understand that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Even the staff, who had seen many events before, exchanged looks of amazement, unable to hide their surprise at the talent unfolding before them. The piano seemed to respond to her emotions, each key resonating with the intensity she felt inside. She allowed herself to follow where the music led, trusting the connection she had with the instrument and the audience. Every rise and fall of the melody, every subtle nuance, carried meaning and emotion. She felt alive in a way she never had before, fully present in the moment, aware of every sound, every breath, every reaction. The room had become a living, breathing space of music, and she was at its center, guiding it, shaping it, sharing it. As the performance continued, she sensed the room's complete transformation. The party guests, once engaged in conversation and small talk, were now entirely focused on her and the piano. The laughter and chatter had been replaced by quiet awe. The atmosphere was charged with emotion, each person feeling the impact of the music in a personal way. Some smiled softly, some had tears in their eyes, and others simply sat, mesmerized by the power and beauty of the performance. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her music had reached them, had touched them. It was not just skill that had captivated the audience. It was honesty, heart, and courage. She had allowed herself to step beyond fear, to share a part of herself that had been hidden for so long, and the audience had responded in kind. She realized that this moment, this connection, was a rare and precious gift, one she would carry with her forever. The final section of her performance approached, and she played with gentle intensity, gradually bringing the piece to a climax. The music swelled, filled with emotion, and then softened, winding down gracefully, each note lingering in the air like a gentle sigh. She held the last chord, letting it resonate fully, before slowly lifting her hands from the keys. The room was silent for a heartbeat, as if everyone was suspended in awe, and then the applause began. The sound of clapping, cheering, and exclamations of amazement filled the hall. Guests were standing, some cheering enthusiastically, others smiling with deep admiration. She opened her eyes, slightly trembling, and looked around. Every face was filled with respect, wonder, and gratitude. They had come expecting a simple tune and had witnessed a piano masterpiece, something alive and moving, created by someone they had underestimated. She felt a surge of pride and humility at the same time, overwhelmed by the experience and the response. The host approached her again, her eyes wide and filled with amazement. "That was more than I could have imagined," she said softly, her voice tinged with awe. "I never expected this. You are incredible." The guests continued to approach, offering congratulations, words of admiration, and questions about her talent and training. She smiled, feeling shy but deeply grateful. She had shared herself, her music, and her heart, and it had been received with love and respect. Even after the performance, the hall remained quiet in a different way. People lingered, reluctant to leave, still feeling the energy and emotion she had created. She returned to her duties, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every task seemed imbued with meaning, every glance from the guests filled with acknowledgement. She had transformed not only the music but the space, and in a way she had transformed herself. The piano had given her a voice, and she had finally allowed it to be heard. Later, as the hall emptied and she sat alone at the piano, she reflected on what had happened. The simple tune she had been asked to play had been just the beginning, a doorway into something far greater. She had discovered that courage, passion, and honesty could create connections that were real and profound. The applause, the admiration, and the emotional reactions of the audience had been affirmations. But the true reward was the realization that she could share herself fully and be received, respected, and appreciated. She played a few gentle notes for herself, savoring the quiet aftermath, feeling a sense of completion and fulfillment. The music lingered in the air, a reminder of what had been created and shared. She knew that this was not the end, but a beginning. There would be more opportunities, more performances, and more moments where she could let the music speak. And she understood now that her gift was not just for herself. It was for the world to hear, to feel, and to be touched by. The applause had barely died down when guests began approaching her one by one. Each face carried astonishment, respect, and admiration. Some shook her hand, some hugged her, and others simply stared in wonder. She smiled shyly, her heart still racing from the intensity of the performance. It was overwhelming, but it felt right. She had stepped into the spotlight, even if only for a moment, and now she could see the effect her music had on others. This recognition, simple yet profound, filled her with a joy she had never experienced before. The host approached her again, a warm smile on her face. "You have a gift," she said quietly, almost reverently. "I can't believe I ever thought a simple tune would be enough for this party. You've transformed the whole evening." The words made her cheeks warm. She had never been spoken to like this before, not in such sincerity. Her life had mostly been ordinary and unnoticed, but here was someone acknowledging her talent with honesty and respect. Other guests continued to approach, some asking questions about her background, how long she had played, and if she had received formal training. She shook her head, modestly explaining that she had learned mostly on her own, with a few lessons here and there, and countless hours of practice alone. They were amazed. They could not believe that someone who had spent her life in quiet dedication could suddenly emerge and deliver such a stunning performance. Each compliment, each smile, reinforced something inside her. That her music mattered and could touch people in ways words could not. A few influential guests lingered, clearly interested in offering opportunities. One mentioned upcoming events where she might perform. Another suggested she consider sharing her talent more publicly. She felt a mix of excitement and disbelief. She had never imagined that such a moment could lead to real change, that her life could shift simply because she had dared to let her music speak. Yet here it was, unfolding before her eyes, possibilities she had only dreamed of now within reach. Despite the excitement, she remained grounded. She knew this was not about fame or recognition, but about sharing a part of herself that had been hidden for too long. The piano had always been her companion, a source of comfort, expression, and joy. Now it had become a bridge between her inner world and the lives of others. Each note she had played had been infused with her heart, her experience, and her dedication. The audience had felt it, and that connection was the most valuable reward of all. After the initial flurry of attention, she returned to her server duties, though everything felt different. She moved through the hall with a quiet confidence, noticing smiles and glances of respect from the guests who had watched her performance. Tasks that had once felt mundane now carried a sense of meaning. Carrying a tray, filling glasses, tidying tables, each action was part of a larger rhythm, a shared experience that had begun with her music. She felt connected to the people around her in a way she had never experienced before, as if the world itself had expanded, opening new spaces for her to explore. She thought back to the first moment she had touched the keys, nervous and unsure, playing the simple tune. She remembered the fear, the doubt, and the small hope that her music might be heard. And now, as she walked among the guests, witnessing their reactions and feeling their appreciation, she understood how far she had come. The music had become a part of her identity, a declaration that she could be both ordinary in daily life and extraordinary in her passion. She had found a way to merge the two, and it had changed everything. By the end of the night, the hall was nearly empty. Guests had departed, leaving behind a quiet, almost sacred space. She sat at the piano once more, her fingers hovering above the keys, reflecting on what had just happened. The room was still, yet it still seemed to hum with the memory of the music, as if it had left an imprint on the very air. She played a few gentle notes, savoring the quiet aftermath, letting herself breathe, and feel the deep satisfaction of what she had accomplished. Alone in the hall, she allowed herself to reflect on her journey. She had started as a server, someone who often went unnoticed, someone who worked quietly behind the scenes. Yet, she had nurtured a secret passion, a love for music, and through dedication and courage, she had found a way to express it. The performance had not only revealed her talent to the world, but had also revealed something important to herself, that her voice, her expression, and her heart had value. She had learned that taking a risk, stepping into the unknown, and trusting herself could lead to experiences that changed everything. The host returned briefly, checking in on her, offering encouragement and suggestions for future performances. Other staff members who had witnessed the event quietly expressed admiration and wonder. She felt a sense of belonging she had never felt before. It was not just about the applause or recognition. It was about being seen, understood, and appreciated for who she truly was. She realized that the piano had been more than an instrument. It had been a mirror, reflecting her strength, passion, and dedication back to herself and to the people around her. That night, as she left the hall and walked home under the quiet glow of streetlights, she felt a sense of possibility she had never known. She thought about the invitations to perform, the recognition from the guests, and the connections she had made. Yet even more than that, she felt a renewed belief in herself, in her dreams, and in the power of her own voice. She understood that this moment was a turning point, a moment where she had stepped out of the shadows and claimed a space for herself in the world. In the days that followed, she found her life subtly changing. Opportunities began to appear. Invitations to perform at small gatherings, offers to play at events, and connections with others who appreciated her music. Each step was both exciting and a little daunting, but she faced them with quiet confidence. She had discovered that her talent could not remain hidden forever, and that sharing it could lead to experiences she had only dreamed of. She approached each new opportunity with gratitude, humility, and determination, knowing that the journey had only begun. She continued to play, practicing every day, exploring new pieces, improvising, and refining her skills. The piano became a constant companion, a source of joy, expression, and connection. She remembered the night of the party often, the moment when a simple tune had grown into a masterpiece, and the room had fallen silent in awe. It was a reminder that courage, passion, and dedication could transform even the smallest opportunities into life-changing experiences. She carried that lesson with her, letting it guide her in every note she played, in every chance she took, and in every connection she made with others through her music. As time went on, she became more confident in sharing her talent with others. She played for friends, family, and new audiences, always mindful of the joy and connection that music could bring. Each performance was a chance to express herself, to touch hearts, and to create moments that were meaningful both for her and for those who listened. She had learned that talent alone was not enough. It was the courage to share it, the authenticity of her expression, and the willingness to step into the unknown that made the difference. Looking back, she understood that the night she had played at the party had changed more than just the perception of her talent. It had transformed her own understanding of herself, her confidence, and her place in the world. She realized that she could no longer hide her gifts, could no longer remain unnoticed in quiet corners. The world had responded to her music, and she had responded in kind, stepping fully into her own potential. It was a profound realization, one that would shape her choices, her dreams, and her life for years to come. In her quiet moments, when she sat at the piano alone, she remembered the applause, the astonished faces, and the silence that had held the room in awe. She played not for recognition, but for the joy of creation, the expression of her heart, and the connection she could make with others. Each note, each chord, was a continuation of that moment, a reminder that she had stepped into her own power and shared it with the world. And in that sharing, she found not just fulfillment, but a sense of purpose, hope, and endless possibility.